Welcome to Season 4 of SheVentures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. SheVentures is a podcast about women who are pivoting in their lives and careers. We live in a world where women of color founders raise 0.5% of all venture capital in 2020, and women overall a paltry 2.2%. This podcast is about elevating women's voices. Our new website, SheVenturesPodcast.com, provides resources, actionable tips, mentorship, and community. We do not subscribe to the idea that there is a dearth of fundable ideas from women. There is no pipeline problem. There may be a visibility problem, and that is what we are here to fix together. Let's talk about the reality of women, money, entrepreneurship, and work-life balance on this season of SheVentures. She was raised in the U.S. in a first-generation family from Taiwan, lost her mother to breast cancer as a child, helped raise her sibling in a household where money was tight before leaving home to attend University of Southern California, and graduated with a degree in civil engineering. She landed her first job as an engineer, then post 9/11, pivoted to become a Secret Service agent to fulfill her sense of civic duty. Other pivots include she was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, got divorced, had to hustle to rekindle her career, and got remarried. Today, she's here to talk about her journey, triumphs, and struggles, and of course, what prompted her to run as an independent for city council in Naperville, a suburb of Chicago. Lucy Chang Evans, welcome to SheVentures.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
I read your story initially on LinkedIn, and what drew me to you was the honesty in which you speak about your life. Can you tell listeners a little bit about your early life and some of the memories that shaped you?
Yeah, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and this was at a time when there were very few Asians. Basically, my siblings and I and one other family were the only Asians at my elementary school. And so that shaped me as feeling like an outsider. I was very much accepted by my friends, but not so much by the community. And so I always felt like I had to prove myself in school and in everything else in life. So that when you transition into college, I wanted to make sure that I chose a major that gave me a good living. I wanted a good job, a respected profession, so I chose civil engineering. And it was great. It was a great career, but after a while I became bored. I wanted something a little bit more exciting, and I still had the strong sense of civic duty. So that's when I started looking into different careers. The first one I looked into was the FBI, and I applied. That process took about 3 years, and I still didn't get called for my first interview until 3 years later. And by that time,
that's a backlog, huh?
Yeah, it's a difficult process.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And so in the meantime, I applied for the Secret Service and I got hired within a year. So it was a very similar application process, but it was sped up after 9/11.
Makes a lot of sense. And we'll get to that definitely because I want to hear about it. So one of the things that I know about engineering, STEM in general, civil engineering specifically, currently the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that only 18% of engineers are women. Probably when you graduated, even fewer. What did it feel like, or did you feel like you were in a male-dominated field?
I definitely felt like I was in a male-dominated field. When I first started civil engineering, these are the early classes. There were a handful of other women in my classes with me. And by the time I graduated, though, those upper level classes, I was usually the only female in those classes. So I don't know if there was attrition with the other women or maybe just the way the classes shook out, but it did seem very male dominated, but it didn't bother me. I did not feel at all like any kind of disadvantage. It just seemed that most women didn't choose engineering as a career field.
Right, which is definitely true. And Would you say that your ethnicity played a role? Because there's always this stereotype, I hear often of Asians being very good at math and science. Is that something that you've ever had to contend with?
Yeah, it was true in my in my experience. I loved math. When I was in elementary school, I loved math and science. So, and my father, both of my parents were civil engineers for undergrad. My father pivoted towards he was a civil engineer for undergrad, and then he got a master's in chemistry. So he was a chemist by profession, and my mother was a civil engineer, and she actually got a master's in civil engineering from Purdue, but she didn't actually work in the profession. She stayed home with us 4 children, which was a
Right. A big
full-time
job.
job. Yes.
Probably harder than building a bridge, I'm sure. Attracting more women to STEM fields right now is a very hot issue. You said that you felt supported academically. Did you feel supported in your first job?
Yes, I did. Fortunately, my first job, my boss was a female, and there were 2 of us who just graduated, and we both started at the same time. So my other coworker was a woman too, and she was so much smarter than me. We're still great friends to this day. Her name's Eva, and she and I were great working together. So we were 2 young new engineers working under a female boss. So I think that's not typical
Right.
of engineers in general. So I was very fortunate for that.
And then you described looking for it wasn't fulfilling whatever desire that you had. And so can you walk listeners through, let's say I've graduated from college and I want to consider a job as a Secret Service agent. Tell me how I would go about that and what are my chances of being selected?
Well, the chances are low. It is a very competitive application process and application pool. So the thing I would say is most Secret Service agents, at least in my experience, came from a law enforcement background. It was mostly law enforcement officers from local municipalities and attorneys, and that was for the most part it. There were a few engineers like me, and there were other miscellaneous people from different backgrounds, but it was mostly law enforcement or lawyers. So in that sense, for any federal law enforcement, like a lot of people want to be FBI agents, a lot of people want to be Secret Service agents, ATF agents, the best advice that we give them is don't plan on it. Just do what you want to do. Choose a profession that's going to pay you well, because the odds are that you will not get hired. And it's a sad reality, but the odds are not in people's favor. So do what you're going to do. Learn how to work hard in any profession. And if you do get hired, you will bring so much to the table. That's what they are looking for. They're looking for ready-made people.
Yes. And so that would be the icing on the cake. I always hear about, or this is more like Netflix, so I'm not saying this is at all true, but like Secret Service agents going through like intense mental and psychological testing. Is that all part and parcel of what you went through in addition to the physical?
Not really. Well, the psychological testing, there is no psychological testing. It's more just, can you survive the training? And
That's a fair question.
yeah, so there's a lot of peer pressure. Honestly, Secret Service agents, you will never find so many type A people in a room as a room full of Secret Service agents. And I loved it because I can't stand it when people are late. I can't stand it when people aren't prepared. Very few agents will ever let you down. You can depend on your fellow Secret Service agents.
That is a nice feeling. You protected some big names. I read on your profile Barbara Bush, George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Jimmy Carter. Can you tell us if you had a favorite?
Favorite? No, I mean, not, I never had an actual detail, which is basically after 10 years as a Secret Service agent, you're assigned to one protectee.
Got it.
You just kind of go wherever a protectee is going. Yeah. So that's why I protected so many different people. You just get assigned to every different detail. or every different
That's
protection
cool.
assignment. Yeah. And but my favorite was it was absolutely hands down George W. Bush, because he's the only one that I had a very awkward face-to-face moment with. And he was very gracious about it. And yeah, nobody gets it's very, I've never been face-to-face with the president since then. So it was a great experience.
What was awkward about it?
Well, so this is my favorite story to tell my children also. I was standing in front of his hotel door, waiting for him to return from his speech. So my only job was to stand in front of that door. And as soon as he came back to his hotel room, all I had to do was move out of the way. And all he had to do was walk inside the door. You have your little Secret Service earpiece, and I could hear that he was on his way. I was really excited to see him for the first time in person. And he walks up to the door, and I move out of the way, and he moves over kind of towards me. he, he didn't go into the room. And I was a new agent at the time, and I thought, I'm going to get in trouble if I say anything to him. I feel like I should say hi. And I tried to, and nothing came out. I mouthed the word hi to him, but nothing came out. And he just stood there. It was only like maybe a 2 or 3 second exchange, but he just stood there looking at me. And, I mouthed hi. And then
Did he look bemused or like confused, or what? How did he seem?
I did not know how to read him. He looked like he was waiting for me to say something. So his detail leader, which is another Secret Service agent who's with him all the time, said, "Sir, go ahead and go in." And so the president walked into his hotel room. They shut the door. And I thought, oh, that was weird. I don't know what just happened there. But later someone came up to me and said, "What were you doing?" And she looked at me. I had very long hair at the time. My hair was covering my identification pin. So he didn't know I was an agent. He thought maybe I was there to greet him.
Oh, now that makes sense. I was like,
Exactly.
why would he just be looking at you and not saying anything?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Oh my gosh. Okay. You also investigated financial crimes post 9/11. What was that like, and what were you looking for?
I got such an education. So I was assigned to the Financial Crimes Squad, also known as the Fraud Squad, and I investigated identity theft and credit card fraud. And obviously, it was so huge back then. It's still huge now, but it was quite an education to see how organized crime knew how to work identity theft and credit card fraud, and how prevalent it was. We would serve search warrants all the time. And I remember, this wasn't my case, but somebody else had just served a search warrant and found the identities of so many different people, including an agent.
Oh my gosh. But that's kind of incredible. And you're right, it is a very serious issue, especially for everyone, but the older population in particular gets targeted so often.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to ask you was, were you looking specifically at terrorist related activity, or was it just broad across the board?
Well, I was hoping that I could get in on the whole, intelligence, counterterrorism gig. You can get assigned to any squad, and they assign you to that. So, if I had stayed in Secret Service, I probably would have wanted to get into one of those squads, but mine was financial crimes. So we did deal with terrorism, but in different aspects.
Got it. You decided to leave the workforce and become a full-time mom, much like your own mom. And it's a decision that you don't question then or now. What was the adjustment like from being really a high-profile working professional to a stay-at-home mom?
Yeah, that was a slap in the face. I thought I quit before having kids. I quit because we wanted to have kids. And we were dating long distance. So I moved out to DC to marry my first husband. And it was interesting because after I left the Secret Service, when I met new people, when I would tell them I don't work, I felt like I became a no one. And even after I had kids, we moved here to Naperville, Illinois. And before I met my mommy group, I just felt like everyone that I met, they were much more interested in knowing that my husband was an FBI agent. And I felt like I didn't have much of identity.
Yeah, you felt invisible.
Yeah, I felt invisible. And it's, a lot of it is, what does your husband do when you're talking to other moms? Not everyone, but for a lot of people that I had just met. So it took a while for me to meet. But once I met new friends, we all got to know each other as people and not professions.
And after you had 3 children,
Mm-hmm.
after 10 years of marriage, you and your husband decided to divorce. And at the time, you say that your children were 2, 5, and 8. So, for listeners, so many women go through this. How did you cope with the idea of being a single mom of 3, firstly? And then I'm also wondering if you have tips that you could provide listeners who might be looking at that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I will say I didn't see it coming. I think a lot of women, in speaking to any woman who's in a marriage where they think that maybe it's not working out, maybe start planning, start thinking about what you might need to do for money.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in
Right.
case. I didn't plan on it. So it really caught me off guard. And I think when you don't see it coming, it makes it that much worse and that much better in some respects, because that's it. You know, you have no choice but to move on. So I would say reach out to your friends. It was so difficult for me to even admit that I had a failed marriage and that I was going to go through a divorce. I was the first among my friends to go through a divorce like this with children. So I was embarrassed and felt very alone and felt like, oh, this is it. I'm going to live in poverty. This is the last I'm going to know of a normal life. And this is just awful.
Were you ever worried about your ex-husband taking custody of your children?
No, I wasn't, because he recognized that I could provide a good home for the children and that I was also a stay-at-home mom. So at the time, we weren't even talking about me going to work. I was just trying to figure out if it was possible for me to still stay at home with them, just living off child support, which, as it turns out, no.
Right. It is usually woefully inadequate for the actual needs of a living family, is what I've been told.
Right. Yeah, unless he's a doctor, unless he makes a really good living, you're going back to work.
Yes, and you thankfully had your degree in civil engineering, you had your past experience, but I can imagine that you all of a sudden have to shift mentality from being a stay-at-home mom to brushing up your resume and getting out there again. How did you approach that?
Well, I dragged my feet for 2 months. When we first filed for divorce, I was like digging in my heels. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna find a really cheap apartment in a tiny town somewhere where I can afford to live off child support. That was a horrible idea, by the way, because my kids.
But
my
you loved
kids,
your kids, right? And you
yeah.
wanted to be with them, of course.
Well, but they still wanted to be with their friends, which are here, and it's expensive to live in Naperville. But I just sat on it for 2 months. Like I said, I didn't see it coming. I cried for like 2 months straight. And I needed to get my act together to wrap around the whole idea of building a future for myself. So after 2 months, I started just looking at jobs. And looking back, I can't believe that I was doing calculations on, well, can I survive off of minimum wage? I was thinking that I would have to start off at a minimum wage job because I'd been out of the workforce for so long.
You were really undervaluing yourself.
Oh, absolutely. My self-esteem was already in the toilet. So when your self-esteem is that low and then you have to go back to work,
Yeah.
I just thought I was going to have to start at the very bottom, wherever it was. Plus, I was hoping that I could find a job that had flexible enough hours so that I could still be there for my kids before and after school.
How did that work? Were there resources that you looked at? Was it just LinkedIn? Was it networking? How did you find that first job?
Well, so the first job was Interestingly enough, when I first started applying, I was applying for administrative assistant positions. And I know I put my application in at Costco, even though they weren't advertising jobs. I just put an application in.
Wow.
I did not know how to look for a job.
Yeah. I understand that though.
Yeah, I didn't know where to look, and I didn't know anybody in Illinois on a professional level. All of my professional experience was in California. If I lived in California, I probably could have returned to engineering very quickly. But as it turns out, I didn't know anybody out here. There were no civil engineering jobs posted at the time that I started looking. So finally, after 2 months of me looking, oddly enough, engineering jobs started popping up. And I specifically targeted government jobs because they tend to be lower stress, and you can take care of your family while working that job. So I applied to a few jobs. The first few jobs that I applied to for engineering, I actually got rejection letters, at least, because for any of the other jobs that I applied to, I didn't even get acknowledgement that they received my application. I hate that.
It's
I really wish they would
disheartening.
change that. Yeah. Just at least acknowledge that I'm not qualified, or that you're looking at other candidates. Just tell me that you even received my resume.
Completely. No, it's so true. And today, we use the internet so much for hiring. And I'll just say that when I receive resumes, often I don't even get a cover letter anymore. Like, it's a completely different environment than 20 years ago.
Sure. And I understand why they don't put cover letters together anymore, because they don't get responses. So why put the effort into putting a cover letter together?
The worst thing that ever happened to me, I mean, if this is the worst thing, it's not that bad, but I was in graduate school looking for an internship, and I was doing the thing where I had a kind of broad-based cover letter, but I was cutting and pasting the name of the person at the publication, and got distracted, whatever. So I didn't know until it was sent back to me, but this person took the time to send back to me my cover letter, and he or she circled the name and pointed out that it was not her name. And that has stayed with me all my life. And now I really try to check, double check, triple check, because those kind of things, they do matter.
Oh, absolutely.
So that was my little embarrassing story. So you remarried and you have stepchildren now. Is that right?
Yes, but they are adult stepchildren.
Okay.
So I have step grandchildren now.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yes, they're so cute.
Do you have any advice for women who are contemplating blended families? And I guess maybe it's a little different for you if the children are adults, but was there ever any friction, or was it easy for the respective children to form relationships?
It took a little time. Actually, it took basically no time at all for my children to adjust to having a new man in my life, which is a testament to my husband, Jim. He didn't insert himself in with the children. We kind of slowly transitioned the kids into meeting him, telling them that we're in a relationship, and then transitioning into, hey, he's going to be family now. But he's great with the kids, and my kids are very, I would say they're pretty adaptable, and so they liked him right away. But his children, it took a little time for them to want to meet me, but that's more of a testament to his own first marriage.
Yes, understood. I think we can all read between the lines there. And we've probably all been in that situation. So you are currently studying for an MBA. It's as if you are a lifelong learner,
Yes.
which I love. And I'm curious why you decided to pursue politics at the city council level, and why now?
Yeah, that is probably the funniest thing about me in my political aspirations. I did not plan on running for anything. My friend Christina had been bugging me for a while to run for something, to run for city council, run for a county board or something. And I just kept telling her, no, you're being ridiculous. I don't want to be a politician. And so finally, it was 2 weeks before the petitions for Naperville City Council were due. And she said, "Why don't you just run? I don't understand why you won't run." And I said, "I don't want to run. Why would I?" And she kept poking me and basically forcing me to come to the conclusion that, look, I have no reason to say no anymore. I haven't, like, why shouldn't I run? I do have a lot of things to say,
Yes.
And
Yeah.
one thing that I've always said is, if you want somebody to represent someone like you in politics, that person is you. So, I was remarking that, hey, there's nobody on city council that was a single mom, is a civil engineer, is, Asian. I
Right.
represent a lot of demographics that I would like represented. So I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't know anybody else who's exactly like me who will run. So I suppose I should run. And because of COVID, I can do it on the cheap because we can't go host coffees. We can't, there's not much that we can do. So I kind of on a whim decided to run.
That's exciting. And you decided to run as an independent. I'm also an independent. So you are after my own heart there. But it's hard to run as an independent, I would think. Is it or is it not?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely. The numbers. So after the election, I lost. I didn't even come close to winning, but I got about 4,000 votes. It took about 8,000 to win. But, interestingly enough, I ran on a tiny budget, $2,500.
Oh my gosh. Good for you.
Yeah, if you look at the cost per vote, my votes were 60 cents per vote. And I think a lot of the other candidates had to spend $4 per vote. So, it kind of encourages me so that if I do run again, and the next time people will be familiar with my name, I just came from out of nowhere. I wasn't part of the political community. I am now, but I wasn't before. So I understand everyone's hesitation. They didn't know who I was. I wasn't vocal in city council meetings. I wasn't vocal in the community. I wasn't part of a lot of community organizations. I just kind of came from nowhere. So
Right.
next time.
Next, that's right. And do you think the fact that your opponents spent so much more, is that also an indication that more money is necessary for someone to win?
I think so. I mean, that's the sad conclusion that I've come up with. It will take more money. I think part of the thing is money generates your publicity.
Right.
So you really need that to get your name out there. Naperville is a town of about 145,000 people, and it's too big of a territory for you to knock on doors and reach everyone. So I think the money's necessary. It makes me a little sick to know how much money goes into politics now, because some of the candidates have spent, I don't think for this election, but I know past candidates have spent like $60,000 on their campaign and lost.
Wow.
So I cannot imagine wanting something that much.
Yeah, and it sounds like if it's a grassroots type movement, that it would take a lot of planning years before, or at least I guess a year before, maybe two, right, to start garnering the interest of people and getting that whole momentum going and the donations starting to flow in.
Yeah, I'm still learning the process. A lot of people are way ahead of me on this game, but I will say that the $2,500, 1,300 of it was my own because I spent it before fundraising. So the remaining $1,200, I raised that in one day. So that was shocking to me and I shut it down. I wanted to cap it at 2,500. So I loved the fact that I did not have to spend a whole lot of my precious time fundraising. And I hate asking people for money.
Yeah, I think it's like something that makes almost everyone's skin crawl, right? It's a terrible feeling, but yet so necessary to accomplish things at times. So you didn't win, but if you had, and when you do, um, what would you want your constituents to know about you in terms of your policies?
Well, my policies, I think they're straightforward, and I think more politicians will be running on the platform that I ran on, which was it's sustainability. And the three pillars of sustainability are people, planet, and prosperity. So every decision that you make, if you take those three, not just people and planet, you also they have to make financial sense, so the prosperity has to be in there. Everybody needs to know what's in it for them or how much it's going to cost them. So if you take all three of those into account, you're going to be responsible. Your decisions will be responsible. So that's the message I'm trying to get across. I need to tell people who I am and how I am likely to vote. And if they agree with it, then they will vote for me.
And how would you say you are, like, as an independent? Are you socially liberal, fiscally conservative, or how would you describe yourself in those terms?
Well, I'm pretty much right down the middle. I'm a little bit more liberal with, being an Asian and a female. I do think that we need to be a little bit more active in diversifying everything, everything in life. And it sparks creativity and prosperity. But as far as, there's a lot of controversy with law enforcement and policing. I'm very much on the side of police. I understand that there are a lot of reforms that are necessary, but for the most part, there needs to be some compromise. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater with regards to policing, because they are there for the public. And I don't like to see people denigrate policing in general. So in that respect, I think I lean a little more conservative.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that has even become a conservative issue because, when I was growing up, the police were there, as you said, to protect you. And I have two daughters, one 17, one 14. They spend a lot of time on TikTok. I don't know if that's where they're getting some of their, let's call it, if we're going to be generous, we'll call it being woke, but
Yes.
I could call it a lot of other things. But one of the things that one of my daughters said to me about, it was post George Floyd, which everyone agrees was a travesty. However, to take that, and now probably going to get myself into trouble, and say that all police officers are no good. And then I think there was a movement called All Lives Matter. She said that that was basically saying that you agreed to what happened to George Floyd. And so things are getting so convoluted in this day and age that it's a little bit kind of terrifying.
Right. It's polarizing. Where do you have one bad cop, which leads to possibly a bad department, which leads to possibly a bad police agency. I don't doubt that that's what's happening, but it does not mean that every single police department is run by a bunch of murderers. It's crazy that people would think that. And, well, then I hope you never have to call 911 because
Right. You don't want a thug to show up at your door to protect you.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely, I understand that completely. So where can people learn more about you and what you may be up to in your future?
Well, I have not been maintaining my campaign website. I post regularly on LinkedIn. I had a post that went viral back in April. What's funny is it went viral. It's got, I think, 3.8 million views or something.
Good for you.
Yeah, I could not believe it. And the funny thing is everybody was asking me why I posted that. And I said, well, the sad fact of the matter is I was still licking my wounds from losing the election.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And feeling sorry for myself a little bit. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to write a nice little story about how I went back to work. And because I'm not working now, I'm devoted to my MBA program. I am going to have to relaunch my career again at some point. So I'm just going to put it out there to only my people, because I did not have many followers on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That, hey, this is what I did. If you're going through something similar, a lot of people want to see you succeed. And subliminally, I was putting the message out there that I'm going to need a job soon.
That's a great way to do it. 3.2 million people know it now. Oh, it's been such a pleasure having you on. And I guess my last question would simply be, if you had one woman, dead or alive, that you look up to, who would that be and why?
Oh, this is a really hard, you know what? This sounds like an easy question, but it's really hard because I have not had much mentorship in my life, even though I've searched for it. So,
That's interesting.
yeah, it's I reached out and was met with a no throughout my life.
Hmm.
I don't know.
And it doesn't have to be someone you know. Like, it could be someone publicly that you admire.
Okay, well then I will choose Kamala Harris because I find her to be a fantastic leader.
Yes. I had a t-shirt. What was her famous saying when Mike Pence interrupted her? Oh, I can't remember it now. Okay, never mind. But it was a great quote, and I had it on my t-shirt, and I think she's pretty cool. Yeah. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was such great fun.
You've been listening to SheVentures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.